This video will briefly cover the new additions in the 6th edition of Starting Out with Python by Tony Gaddis. So let's jump straight in. The first thing that we're going to take a look at is multiple assignment. Imagine we have something like this. This can be done in one line instead. So instead we could do a comma b is equal to 10 comma 20. So we can assign it in one line instead. And this works with other data types too. We could have name and age is equal to Anna and 50, for example. The next thing they cover in the new edition is single line if statements. If we have something similar to what we see on the screen here, where we have an if statement with only one instruction in the code block, we could make it a one-line if statement, like so. And speaking of if statements, they also cover that if statements can be used as a ternary operator. So let me change the code and then I'll explain. Here we are using a ternary operator. We are assigning something to the variable message, and we assign it is cold today if the temperature is less than or equal to 7. Otherwise, message will be assigned this message instead. It is not cold today. So depending on this variable, it will be assigned either it is cold today or it is not cold today. Another thing covered is the Walrus operator. And let me write some code and then I can talk about what it does. So with some code on the screen, let's investigate. So we have a couple of variables. And here is the interesting thing, the Walrus operator. It does two things. It calculates salary plus tip and assign it to total, a new variable, but it also returns that number so that we can compare it with, in our case here, 1100. And if it happens to be true, so that we enter the if statement, then we would print this, and then we can use that new variable total inside the if statement. So it assigns a value to it, and then we can use it later on. Another thing covered is how we can replace a for loop with a while loop. In this case here we have a for loop that iterates 10 times. This can be replaced with a while loop that does the same thing, and it would look like this. So these two loops are equivalent. One thing to note here is that if we use a while loop for this, we must not forget to increase I, otherwise we will create a never-ending loop. Another new addition is the single line while statement. And to look at this, we're going to use something similar to this, but I'm going to make it a little bit simpler. So let me replace this with this, where we are going to loop 10 times and increase I and print it each time. But let's make it into a single line while statement. Using the Walrus operator, we can increase I by 1, assigning it to I, but also returning that value so that it can be printed. So we have transformed what we had before to a single line while statement. They had another cool example of how we can use a while loop and the Walrus operator. We can use it for input validation. So if we read something from the user, it can both be assigned to a variable that can be later used if we would like to, but it's also returned so that we can compare it to something. And in this case, we would continue in the loop until the password is correct. The last new addition about loops is break, continue, and else. Imagine that we have a program like the one we see on the screen here, where the user has a bank account and they are gonna deposit some amount. There are a few rules though. They are allowed to have a maximum of 500 kroners and they can only deposit exactly 100 kroner at a time. They can use 0 if they don't want to deposit any more money. So how would we implement these rules? Well, one way of doing it is reading the amount from the user, and if it is equal to 0, we would break out of the loop. So break would always break out of a loop. To implement the rule that they can only deposit exactly 100 kroner at a time, we could use the continue by saying that, alright, if they deposit something that is not exactly 100, we would continue. What continue means is that we would just skip the rest of the loop and continue back and start over in the next iteration. So continue, just skip the rest and jumps back and go the next iteration. So break and continue, and the last thing here is the else. So we can have an else to a loop, and that will only be executed if there is no break. So in this case, in our example here, if the user deposits 100 kroner 5 times, which is the max allowed amount for them, then we would exit the loop using this condition here. And as we didn't use a break, it would print this message. So this will only be printed if we don't use a break inside the loop. When covering functions in the new edition, they cover a few new things. So if we have something like this, it would work. And I could also change this to say something like this. Then we use a mix of position and keyword arguments. But what they cover here in the new edition is that if we change how we write the function to add this, all the arguments must be keyword arguments. So this wouldn't work. I would have to change it to use only keyword arguments. And another thing that we can do when we write our function is to write it like this. This means that no keyword arguments are allowed. So this wouldn't work. I would have to remove all the keywords here. And now it would work. Another thing that they cover is that we can use default arguments. So here, if I have second, for example, I can specify that if I don't supply anything when I call the function, I only supply first, then second would automatically be assigned 100. But if I want, I can still call the function using 2 arguments, then second would of course be assigned 20 instead of 100. So 100 will only be used if we don't supply a second argument, like so. When working with files in Python, it could look something like this, where we open a file, then we write to the file and close it. And it is very important that we close the file, so more likely we would use a try except finally and have the closing finally. But in the new edition of the book, they show us something different. And it would look something similar to this. Here we are using the with open statement. And this file is open just like before. The one benefit is that if there is an error or something goes wrong while we're in this code block, Python makes sure to close that resource when we leave the code block. So we don't have to close it manually. Python does it for us. So a little bit cleaner than what we had before. Jumping ahead to lists and tuples, they cover a new method called count that It checks in a list how many times something occurs. So how many times does 10 occur in this list? There is also a function called sum that just sums up all the values in the list. And there is one other thing. I'll change this example a little bit and then I'll explain. It has to do with tuples. So imagine that we have this tuple that contains two elements. And a tuple is unmutable. So after we have created it, we cannot change the two elements here. But what they cover in the new edition of the book is that if one of these elements is something that is mutable, for example a list, we could do something like this, where we reference the first element and then we say that, all right, this element is a list, so at index 0 I would like to change that to 20. So if we have a tuple which is unmutable that contains something that is mutable, like a list for example, we can change something in that list, similar to what I did here. The last new thing covered has to do with dictionaries. So imagine we have a dictionary and then we are printing it. But what if we want to update this dictionary? So we want to update the salaries. Well, we could use a merge. And it would look like this. So here we are merging these two. And if it happens that one of the key value pairs appears in both of them, the later one will be used. So Alice has got a new salary. These two, Dorothy and Frank, they were not in the original one, so they are just added together with Bob and Charlie that only existed in the original one. So this is a merge. We could also use an update. It's very similar to a merge. The difference is that we are updating salary directly. So here we are creating a new dictionary when we're doing the merge that is then assigned to salary. But with the update, we are updating the original salary directly.